Behind me is where the old Market Wheaton railway station used to be, currently covered in houses, much like the rest of the line that it sat on, gone. Don't be fooled though, as the birds chatter above me. This railway, and specifically the corridor that it served, today is now an exceptionally busy freight and passenger corridor, carrying, I mean, this lot, but also connecting several major urban centres. The A1079, this road, Hull Road or York Road, depending on which end of it you're at, is an extremely congested road, particularly at rush hour, and it simply isn't fit for purpose. The answer, of course, is not to bloody turn it into a dual carriageway. So should trains return to this corridor? Well, the answer is absolutely yes. This railway is gone and it is never coming back, but that doesn't mean that a new railway cannot rise in its place.
As ever, if you want to arm yourself with the tools to make transport better, then joining the Patreon for £5 a month is a great place to start, giving you the free audiobook of How the Rails Will Fix the Future, as well as access to the weekly bonus episode with the full back catalogue, adding a big chunk to the Rail Natter canon. Go to patreon.com/Gareth Dennis.
As a railway engineer whose career has been built around defining what a railway should look like, from the earliest scoping right through to building the damn thing, tonight we're going to be looking exactly at what a new railway linking York and Hull should look like. Everyone, welcome to tonight's Rail Natter.
And as the Intercity 225 fades away. We're back, everyone. We are back. It's a delight to be back, to see you all, to be here. How are you all? Are you all well? Look at this. Yes, we're here. I'm so glad to have you all back. Look, we are, yes, as this sign in Stamford Bridge says, old railway station play area. We're building railways tonight, and I'm very excited to be doing it. Look, for anyone who's new to the show or is sort of watching this out of sequence or hasn't been catching or is catching up, whatever, go back to episode 313 to watch the intro to this sort of series of Yorkshire-ish. I mean, it's not all Yorkshire, and there's bits of places that aren't Yorkshire, but it's kind of Yorkshire, some of North Lincolnshire, some of further north than is Yorkshire, basically looking at the rail network of this area around York. Independent of historical boundaries. That's what we're doing. And from that, we created, we had a look at the kind of the existing map. Pink are the current lines, yellow those that are currently or soon to be electrified. And we, yes, there are some bits missing quite deliberately from this. And we worked out that the Hull area has some shortcomings, not least a crossing the Humber. We worked out that there is a strategic gap between York and Hull. This is using our kind of patented sort of network development tool last time. Go back to the episode and watch. We worked out that the Yorkshire coast is missing gap and that there are problems on the edge of the Yorkshire Dales as well. But tonight we're looking specifically at the York to Hull corridor. Now, for any railway corridor, as we talked about in the episode, you have to look at the local, the regional and the national story in its totality. We start with the A1079. The A1079 is the main route going from York to Hull, and it's a pretty congested road. I mean, I don't drive it hugely often, thankfully. Whenever I do, it's unlikely that there's going to be a free road. The likelihood is that I'm going to meet congestion. It is about doubly as congested as similar roads in the rest of England. There are three different ways to measure that. The first is average speed. This is the TFT way of looking at congestion. The first most useful, kind of the first of the three useful ways to kind of look at congestion is average speed. The second is average delay. That's measured in how many seconds per mile are added to a journey as a result of congestion. And the third is the reliability of those journey times. So of those three metrics, let's have a little look at the averages for England. The way these aren't GB-wide, there are GB-wide stats, but they're going to look at the English ones specifically and then compare them to the A1079. So for average speed, the average speed on this kind of road, so comparable road, is 32 to 36 miles an hour. The average speed on the A1079 is 15 to 22 miles an hour. The average delay on the average sort of semi-rural road, a bit like the 1079, connecting major centres, is 18 to 25 seconds per mile. The average delay on the A1079 is substantially higher than that, 45 to 65 seconds per mile on the A1079. And in terms of journey time reliability, this is a little less specific. Well, the average is expected to be moderate to high journey time reliability on a road of this nature. For the A1079, journey time reliability is low. That means the variation of journey time is pretty substantial and unpredictable, which is bad for everyone involved, really. By all three of these measures, the A1079 is one of the most congested roads, sort of semi-urban and rural roads in England and indeed in Britain. And it's not good enough. Yeah, sound levels are bouncing around a bit. I don't know why. Hopefully that's coming through all right in OBS. I'll keep that up to have a little look for the next bit. But we have to talk about traffic density because the traffic density on the 1079 is not uniform. And traffic density is measured using AADT figures. So this is average annual daily traffic, I think that's specifically set up. Oh yeah, the video bit's very quiet. I don't know why they're coming through so quietly because I've boosted them substantially. That is irritating. I'll have a look at the trace next time. 5,000 to 10,000 is what you'd expect of a typical A road. The A1079 is 15,000 to 20,000. It's substantial, and indeed, it's higher than that on those. This is sort of what you expect from a typical A road. So it's substantially higher to that in sections where it's potentially 28,000 plus on the kind of the approaches to York. So kind of where the connections, Grimston Bar to Dunnington, that section is extremely congested, very, very slow, congested section. The rural section is between 15,000 and 20,000. And then as you get closer to Beverley and into Hull, it goes back up to 20 to 25,000 as you pull in other traffic from other roads as well. So I'm looking just at this kind of the central rural section, if you like, and it is still double the daily flow of comparable sections. So the answer, you might think, is, oh, well, then you need to build a dual carriageway. No, do not do that. Dualing the whole thing, well, basically you'd be back exactly where you started within about 3 to 5 years before, all of those congestion figures basically return to original levels. It's worth for a moment going, how can you just say that? There are a few different ways that manifests, that actually happens. Getting into a little bit of kind of highways theory here. The first of those is called the triple convergence effect. A lot of people... No, chill out. Sorry, I need to remind myself to always put the pen on because then I can do scribbles without accidentally inadvertently advancing the screen. So the first of those is the triple convergence effect of induced demand. So that's spatial convergence, temporal convergence, and modal convergence. What that means is that traffic flows sort of... when you build new capacity, drivers switch from alternative routes. That's your modal shift. They alter travel times to move to peak hours. So they stop adjusting their behavior. They kind of just go, now there's a new road, I can just drive when I want to at peak time. That's fine. And they actually switch. They go, there's the new dual carriage route, and drive instead of taking the bus or whatever it happens to be. So you get the mode shift. You get the spatial shift, and you get the temporal shift. All three of those converge to give you a dramatic induced demand effect. The other thing that happens is that, dualing a specific stretch of road, even if you dual the whole of the A1079, all you're doing is moving the bottleneck somewhere else. You'd be moving it onto the A64 at the York end, or you'd be moving onto the A63, or into the centre of York at the other end. Extra lanes just funnel vehicles back onto narrow rural or urban roads, roundabouts, and so on, that just don't have the capacity to manage that additional demand. The other thing that's kind of an interesting effect is inadvertent car dependence. So lower commute times encourage urban sprawl. So, you've got a reduction in the commuting times on the road. So you go, okay, that'll move a little bit further out of town. People move further away from their workplaces because they're like, that new road, great. which means they have longer commutes. So it means that when you get those induced demand effects that bring up congestion, suddenly you've locked people into car dependency. And it brings us to the last and slightly kind of, if you like, more Google it and look up the theory of the effects that why dueling it doesn't solve the problem, which is Brace's paradox. Adding new capacity to a complex transportation network can actually slow down overall travel times when it comes to individual pod/car-based transport systems. Drivers collectively kind of flood the newest, most efficient route, causing it to bottleneck worse than the actual original network did. And as Mike C says, people who wouldn't have made the journey at all now have the confidence to start driving. So these effects are why you don't build a dual carriageway. Now, I'm going to very quickly just do a little test of the audio to just see if the effect, if I can just, I don't know why it's going quietly, but if I pop that up a little bit, I don't know why it's going so quietly because I've boosted audio by quite a substantial amount already. So it should be loud enough. If it isn't, I'm so sorry. I'll be going in and adjusting the audio retrospectively, I suspect. Anyway, what say me, Gareth?
A lot of people commute between York and Hull, primarily from Hull to York because accommodation is cheaper in Hull, and back again in the evening. And the result is that it is a very congested road. This is compounded by the fact that it's very congested by particularly agricultural heavy goods vehicles. There are a lot of industrial parks and kind of focuses of industry along the A1079. The result of that is that this road is slow, it's congested, and it is unacceptable, really, that we are pushing people onto that route without any alternatives. They haven't got a choice. There are no viable alternatives to driving for the majority of people who are wanting to travel between the two cities.
But it wasn't always like this. We had the York to Beverley railway line. That was that comprised the direct route from York to Hull. It was built in two sections, actually, because of the usual sort of Victorian railway construction corruption shenanigans. The first section from York to Market Wheaton was built by 1847, including a lovely wrought iron bridge at Stamford Bridge. And the second section was built almost 20 years later from Market Wheaton across to Beverley through tougher terrain, it must be said, post-1840s railway bubble. Imagine if there's a tech bubble happening. That'd be scary, wouldn't it? So yeah, that was built in, kind of opened in 1865. And this line sort of did okay. Like it wasn't utilised as well as it might be. The usual stuff of like there was no policy effort made to for the railway to actually encourage, to tackle or address or compete with road haulage. So by the interwar years, road haulage was really taking a slice out of its pie, and without that usage, particularly for agricultural purposes, the revenue on the line dropped. But actually, it essentially was the revenue broadly covered its purposes, and of course, that's not enough because it's worth saying it got smashed to bits. Yes, the report behind me, Reshaping, said close this. We've talked about this before on the beaching episode. The irony, however, is that it was in the process of being recontrolled into a centralized traffic system. There was re-signaling. They were going to kind of go for signalized single track with passing loops, as was the craze on BR. And they're going to upgrade level crossings. They're going to have coloured lights installed. Huge amounts of this signalling work was done. Tremendous amount of work was done. That was from 1960. 1963, we get Reshaping report published, recommends that passenger services on the line end and that all stations are closed. This line was actually one of the case studies cited, and its expenses and income basically matched. And rather than going, given that they're broadly matching, maybe we could do something to enhance the amount of revenue. No, we're just going to cut the service. This should be familiar to current GBR people because they're doing it right now again. We're doing it again. Do you know what's fun is you can walk along the line at the top end of the line, as I did like way back in like 2008, and find bits of the new signalling system as it had been smashed up when they closed the line. There's these bits of SG, which I believe is Siemens General Electric. I think it's like a combo. It's like some signalling bits of relay or something. I just found these in some leaves next to kind of a battered X location case. Yeah, sad times.
There is a good bus service. In fact, they've got brand new buses. These. I'm going to talk about those in just a second.
In fact, we're going to talk about it now because these buses here, the Alexander Dennis Enviro 400 MMCs, they were introduced very recently. I've noticed them looking very shiny going out towards Hull. They look great. So 7th of August 2026 was this little news article pointing out that the X46 and X47 buses have got these new longer vehicles being introduced. They're shiny. Actually, I think someone else decided not to buy them, and so the East Yorkshire got them cheap. But they have 85 seats, so that's a pretty sizable capacity for a coach, right? 85 seats, pretty good. It's worth saying that because they didn't, versus the old buses, they've knocked out one disabled kind of wheelchair position. There's no longer cycle storage, so it's not all good. You go to the East Yorkshire website, as with a lot of the Go Ahead stuff. Go Ahead are pretty good at operating buses generally. My perception of Go Ahead as the way they operate buses is actually pretty good. There's a lot of really good tech, like you can track every single bus in real time on the website. That's quite useful, so you can see exactly where a bus is ahead or behind you. I think that's fab. Generally, in the day, there are 28 buses in each direction-ish. So 28 times 85 gives us a number of seats per direction, 2,380 seats per day per direction. The bus is half-hourly, by the way. So you've got a half-hourly bus. There is also the hourly train. Yay, trains. It's a train podcast, in theory. We've up to 16 direct services a day. There are a few indirect ones that involve a change, but I'm just going to look at the direct ones. There are 16 direct services a day in each direction. Often it's a 160-seat class up 155. So, yeah, hourly versus half-hourly. It does go much faster than the car in terms of, like, its average speed per the distance that it covers. However, it takes a weird sort of longer route because of the closures, having to keep out of the way of fast stuff on the Selby diversion, and so cannot be more frequent. Despite its higher speed, the longer route also means it's almost always slower than the car. It also misses all of the commuter towns along the direct route. So it's not, also by the fact that it's not a direct route, has a psychological impact on those people actually using it. Other people pointing out, buses finishing early is a challenge in rural areas particularly. Absolutely. Hello chat, by the way. It's nice to see you all. A delight. So how do bus, train and car actually compare? So let's look at first at the modal split in road usage versus the bus and rail potential capacity. So I know it's not quite comparing like for like. So we're comparing the actual daily journeys by car. We can assume this to be sort of 1,400 journeys per direction. We'll multiply that by 1.1 or 1.5 gets you up to the total number of people moving in those directions. So 1,400 car journeys per direction. The daily seats by train, I'm going to assume the 1.1 at this point because it's a lot of commuters. So that gives you, your daily seats by train, 2,560, 160 times 16, an hourly service. And then your half-hourly bus service is 2,380 seats. So of these kind of, the per direction figures are 18% and 17%. So you're kind of like less than 20% of the daily journeys by car. Those numbers go down if you actually factor in either the 1.1 or the 1.5. I didn't actually do the sum here because I was like, people can squabble over what they reckon the right multiplication is, but you can do the numbers yourselves. That drops down to 13% probably of the total potential humans in cars going back and forth. So you can see, not great. So that's between 25 and 35% of the total people who are traveling there actually using, have the potential to use public transport. And that's before we talk about how many are actually using it, because we aren't necessarily filling every single seat on the bus or the train. In fact, I'm sure we're not. The 35% there is, the total public transport 35%. Well, it isn't the potential because the train misses half the population along the route. And as we're about to see, the bus is almost slower than just cycling. By the way, someone's saying, old urban is saying, have we counted all the seats in the car? So that's never the way to calculate, to do these sorts of calculations. Admittedly, I've not done the full calculation here, but the way to, if I was going to do the full pure calculation of actual total people traveling by road, then I would be using either a 1.1 multiplier per vehicle or a 1.5 multiplier per vehicle. 1.1 is the average commuter car occupancy, and 1.5 is the average all day passenger occupancy. You might be saying, well, why? That's not fair. The cars have 4 seats. Now, the whole point is that you're not going to magically get everyone filling every seat in a car. That's not how it works. The right thing to do is to use the average occupancy, and indeed sometimes the commuter average occupancy, which is that much lower because you've got so many single occupancy vehicles. Not to use every single seat in the car, because the car by its very nature is not a thing that will be filled with. It's not public transport. You're not filling a car with every single. Not every single car is car share. You're not filling every single car. Good point to raise and query. So, what about journey times? York to Hull by car is about an hour, right? York to Hull by rail, even going the weird route, is an hour and 20 minutes. The bus, though, is 2 hours and 20 minutes. So 30% slower by rail and 130% slower by bus. That's why the bus is just severely lacking. And actually what you want to do on a bus on that route is really have the bus complementing a faster rail spine. So, local, regional, national. Let's bear these in mind when we start talking about the actual route. But also, we need to think about the 7 rules, because this goes. I think the last time we talked about the 7 rules it might well have been back for the Welsh episode. We haven't put these up for a while. The Crane Easter rules. Let's talk about the Crane Easter rules. So the first is think about what it's for. The second, of course, is think about what it's for again, and we do a lot of that. So this is really, this by the way, this is harking back to the old Rail Natter episodes. These are all a bit tongue-in-cheek, but they're kind of important rules for just quickly frame in our mind as we think about what railway optioneering we're going to do for a particular corridor. So we've really got to think about what it's for: local, regional, national. Don't just reuse old alignments. That's not the way to approach this exercise at all. Don't just bulldoze everything. You cannot bulldoze residential houses. The assumption is don't ever do that if you can avoid it at all. If you have to do it, think about like property ownership and boundaries and go, well, that house and the boundary, but I'm going to make sure to avoid doing that for anyone others. Not ideal though. Don't bulldoze everything. Mimic real railway geometry. This I can help with. Join the bonus and I'll explain to you how you actually design real railway alignments, curvatures for speeds. We've done it before, but I think we did it for the Cant episode a long while back. Number 6 is slap a cost on it, and don't be afraid to use big numbers. Don't be like, oh, well, that looks a bit scary. Maybe I'll just tweak the numbers so it's a bit lower. No. Using previous projects, we will put a cost on this project by the end of it, and it will be a big number, and that's how much stuff costs, unfortunately. The point is, do you care about the cost, or do you care about doing the right transport thing, as we've determined for need in the previous episode? The 7th is don't do anything fancy. Don't put in a cable-stayed bridge. Don't put in a 20-mile tunnel. Don't do daft stuff. Think about what infrastructure actually looks like. Don't do anything too fancy. Now, back to our map, because that's what you're all here for, isn't it? To get the CAD up, to talk about the map. He says hunting for the map. Let me get my medium face up. So there we go. Right. So let's get stuck in, shall we? So here we go. Here is the map, and you can see we've got York. There's York, lovely, and on the other side we've got Hull. There we go. And we have between them we have got Cottingley. Which I believe is what that specifically counts as. Let's have a look. Yeah, Cottingley. Cottingham. We've got Beverley. We've got Market Wheaton. We've got Pocklington. And then we've got York and the large bits of the lumps that are attached to York for strange reasons. So that is the map. That's the connection that we want to do. And so we know that broadly the sort of direction that we're looking at, we want to be seeing something that does this. We want an alignment that's broadly doing this, taking us from York over to Beverley and then into Hull. And the reality is we know that we're going to come into Beverley in some way and make use of the existing alignment into Hull. That's the right thing to do, right? Yeah? So, how are we going to start this? Well, we're going to start this as I put myself back to, for OBS, half face. We're going to start this by me closing this and doing that. We're going to start this by us going to the first station that we know, which is York. So let's see what I have to say. We're starting in York. We're going to go across to Hull. Let's see what I have to say for myself.
Lovely York station. It's my local station. I'm here a lot. The challenge of getting across to Hull with a direct railway is that there's getting from here, York station, that way. Well, there's a lot in the way, and that's a lot of the problem. There were connections out to the east, but well, let's have a look, shall we? There are 2 railway lines that came out of York to the east. The first is, well, not in time, actually. The other one was the first in time, but the first that I'm going to talk about here, as I cycle on this rarely LTM 120 compliant cycle path, the first is a combination of the Foss Islands branch and the Derwent Valley Light Railway. They take you out of York and plonk you quite usefully in Dunnington, actually, just outside of York. The problem with that railway is that, well, it's the same problem that you have if you're cycling, which is that it is useless in how it actually gets into the centre of York. It kind of loops around on the Foss Islands branch, connecting up where the Roundtree factory used to be. And the other problem is that they've just right now built a bunch of houses on the former junction, so that route is out. The other is the further north, the York to Market Wheaton line, and some of it is, accessible. You can get off onto this bit, which is a cycle path, and so following it right up until the point where it becomes a link road ahead of me. After that, however, it becomes a residential area and the factory that builds porter cabins, the literal international headquarters of porter cabin. So this doesn't work as a way out of the city. The bigger problem with both of the north-facing kind of escapes out of York, far bigger than, building, millions of pounds worth of residences that have to be bought back, far bigger than that, is operational. If you're building a line that has regional and indeed national benefit that goes from York to Hull, it's a challenge if you have that line coming into York from the north that then has to reverse to head trains in back northwards again. That's not ideal.
And so let's have a quick look at that. Let's have a look back at our map and sort of see what on earth I'm talking about, because it's time that we switched on our alignment design, right? So let me go down here and switch on our beautiful alignment design. So, and actually what I'm going to do now is switch off. So I'm going to leave the little stick line on, but I'm going to switch off all of our towns that we've got here. We're going to get rid of those. We don't need to see them. You know where our towns are. That white stick line is what's showing us where we need to be. We're going to focus on looking at the geometry, the different geometry options that we've got. And also I need to make sure that I put on station structures. There we go. That's perfect. So we have got, there we go, some fun stuff. Some useful bits and pieces to switch on. So yeah, we've got, out of curiosity, if you want to know, so this used to be, this is the junction of the Foss Islands branch. It's now got a bunch of houses on it, so that's done. The connection here, which where you saw me cycling up to that old Market Wheat line, has residences on it. It's done. And the porter cabin factory, admittedly, it's mostly just a car park on the side, but it's also mostly done. But the main issue is the residences area. You're not bulldozing these, so that's done. So what can you do? Well, I think one of the things you can do is unlock some more housing and potentially some other stuff that we'll talk about momentarily by going down here, going around the top, scooping around through the bypass, whizzing out and then rejoining or kind of nominally kissing along with where the Market Wheaton line was, resuming it, and off you go. But these are going, the trouble is that brings your trains in from the north, and this is where we come back to, well, what do you need to do? Maybe you need to connect in from the other direction, in which case, well, that raises some other queries. There's something else that we need to factor in, though, that I really want us to be thinking about. There's another thing that we have to think about, right? So let me tell us about that.
If you're doing something major like building a new railway, you can't just say, well, it's nice there's a railway station there. Railways solve bigger problems than that. They don't just put stations in places, they solve bigger issues. And there are few bigger issues for York than the hospital. It's old, it's squeezed into a space that doesn't suit it properly anymore. The facilities are a bit rubbish. The staff work very hard. And the traffic, there's the car park behind me, or some of it, the traffic around the fact that York Station is located on one of the main radial roads, and the traffic in and out, it basically just breaks York. It completely breaks York. And so if you're doing something major like building a new railway connecting into York, then one of the key problems that you should take the opportunity to solve is York Hospital.
Yes, absolutely. York Hospital, it's, if you might be saying, well, why do you care so much about traffic and congestion? Well, the point is that it stops everything from working. It discourages the fact that you've got the hospital in the middle of York means that you're like, well, you have to allow flow of traffic through the town so that people can get to the hospital, which is why it's a good thing to put the hospital somewhere else out on the ring road, allowing access for everyone basically much more easily, particularly those in the hinterland. And so this is where we go, well, actually, there's an opportunity here to actually connect it to the railway. And so this is where we get York Hospital as an option. And so I'm going to do a lot of jumping between. So let's look at what I'm talking about, because here is where I would put York Hospital, I think. Or, so I put it, so either you're coming off basically on the old, what was the old East Coast Main Line, actually, come around the back of the Tesco's, potentially providing yourself with a, yes, you have to bulldoze a bit of Taddy Road again, potentially providing yourself with a better connection and better use of the park and ride as well, because then you get station connected park and ride, you potentially expand that park and ride. And then you build the hospital, and you build a big hospital campus, spend £1 billion on a big hospital campus, because that's about how much one goes for these days, and close the original. And you could probably do a sizable amount of paying for that £1 billion by selling the prime real estate in the centre of York. You build the railway station, and then you have a rail-served hospital, a large park and ride. You also are, by the way, by having a station there serving Bishopthorpe, so that's you're also expanding the footprint of the railway there. There are alternative options. You could build a station down here, come off the East Coast Main Line a little bit further south, come around the back. The main challenge you've got there is getting over the Ouse, and that is difficult. So, if you're coming around, the main challenge you've got is there's a load of stuff in the way of the Ouse, either Bishopthorpe, the sewage works, the marinas. It's actually, there's a load of stuff in the way of the Ouse right the way down. It's navigable right the way down. The only point you can really cross whilst dodging these assets is where the current bridge is, funnily enough. That means that you'd be affecting the current bridge. You'd be impacting on the current bridge and having to integrate that into the where the cycleway is. There would have to be some thoughts put in there. But that is the best way to cross. If you're coming in from the south, that's kind of what your options are. Again, you can't follow the existing route and cross the river using the existing bridge because there's Bishopthorpe on top of the old railway. Because we're very clever and we don't plan ahead. So that's essentially where we're stuck. Could you come in and tuck onto the railway and kind of potentially you could, but I suspect that would be difficult with the residences. It's certainly an option. You could tuck in. Maybe it's another one that I'll play with. I always tinker with these for a long time. But share your thoughts. What do you think? So that's York. We've got out of York somehow. If you're coming in from the south, or indeed, perhaps from the north, but particularly if you've come up from the south, at that point, you kind of want to go, well, what else can you scoop in? Can you potentially provide links? Dunnington is one of the key commuter routes into York, commuter towns for York. It's quite large. It's expanding. It has industrial connections. Do you pop the station in Dunnington? Even though it's not one of our 5K population centres, it is essentially a commuting corridor into York, and it provides access to that side. So you go from having no stations on the side of York to having a station on the east of York, including some of the hinterland. People might choose to travel to that station, have a park and ride here. There are opportunities there. And then we start squirreling our way off to other directions, which we'll talk about momentarily. Because Dunnington is included, as we've described. And we talked about that, but actually I want to then go, okay, what's next? The thing that's next is Stamford Bridge. We're going to Stamford Bridge. Let's see what I have to say.
Before we get to Stamford Bridge, we come to our first and basically the only major environmental hurdle of the route, which is the River Derwent. It is a triple SI, and you can kind of see why. It's absolutely beautiful, really beautiful waterway, so it's a major environmental challenge. Thankfully though, as you can see, there's the other direction by the way, it looks absolutely stunning, isn't that marvellous? Thankfully though, we've got the original viaduct. Here it is, fantastic. Derwent Viaduct, old York to Market Wheaton line here, full beautiful width, 2-track railway width along here, straight as a die, lovely alignment. Fantastic, right? Well, you'd think so. And it's useful that it's here, you might think, because of course, well, not of course, if you look at the map, you'll see that Stamford Bridge is surrounded on, substantially surrounded by the River Derwent as a key blocker, a key barrier to actually getting access into the town. So it's a good thing that this is here, right? Right? Well, to explore and answer that question, we need to go that way a bit, quite a bit, because quite a lot of railway, but still, or kind of track bed still in place. So let's wander up to the old railway station. It's worth saying that the River Derwent is also a major engineering challenge because it's a massive flood risk. There's a river that loves to be engorged with the slightest hint of serious rain. Indeed, anyone who knows Stamford Bridge knows that through a sizable chunk of the year when there's heavy rain, whether it's summer or particularly in winter, there's just a constant flow of tankers coming in and out of Stamford Bridge, in and out and in and out, because there is so much water to shift from the flooding river. So, it's a good job this bridge is here, right? Right? And so we come to the former Stamford Bridge station, good shed behind me. You can see the platforms here. Wonderful, right? Put the station back where it was, right in the heart of the town. Well, not quite. It's up on the top of the hill, but it's, it's where it used to be. Here's the railway station that we're coming up to behind me. Glorious, everything as it should be. The obvious route for the railway. But there's a problem, because despite a kilometre of extant infrastructure and largely uninterrupted most of the way back to York, look this way and you'll see that at some point some bright spark decided, no, we're going to build an entire residential estate on top of the track bed, paying absolutely no heed of any future potential to reinstate the railway, meaning that building the railway in that direction is impossible.
And this is the challenge because, well, there's two things to talk about here, really. Because if I quickly go into medium phase and get us back to our mapping, Stamford Bridge is not one of our 5,000 population centres. But again, it's growing. It's a major commuter town for York, and it's growing and growing up this side. This side is continuing to expand. How do we manage Stamford Bridge though? Because yes, you've got the triple SI, you have to cross the river at some point and not on the existing viaduct, sadly. Well, there's a few things going on there. Firstly, do you serve the south? It's funny, I'm about to show you a recorded segment. I was like, I'm definitely using the north. And then I was tinkering more and thought, maybe the south is better. Not least because I was like, well, what if you bypass Stamford Bridge? If you don't include Stamford Bridge, what are you gaining? What are you gaining there? That's the sort of thing that you get at Jeffreys. You go, well, okay, what are the journey times with and without it? How would that work? How would that impact? Compare the infrastructure. I think Stamford Bridge does deserve to be on the route because of its potential for growing, actually. It is growing. It's continuing to grow. And I think that serving at the railway is a good idea, again, to solve some of those congestion issues. It's not actually on the X46 route, so it's not served by that corridor. Anyway, you can see that we're starting to braid. Again, what do you think? Get in the comments and tell me what do you think. Do you approach this way? You've got, if you're approaching from the north, which I think we're ruling out, so following the old route, then coming in from that side makes sense. But if you're coming up from the south, so that you access York from the south, from an operational perspective, makes much more sense, then you're probably actually going to cross the River Derwent and provide a station at the top of the hill, on the south of of Stamford Bridge. So that's kind of where I think we're going on that one. Let's see what else I've got to say about Stamford Bridge.
In the case of Stamford Bridge, well, it gives us a bit of a case study as to what can happen at all the railway stations along the route. But Stamford Bridge in particular has been expanding in the direction of where our station will end up being.
Possibly.
It's nice-ish. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the make it look like a cottage right-to-buy style architecture. But that's just Britain, right? There aren't many housing estates that don't have it. But it's fine, new communities expanding in the direction of where our railway station would be. And where we are positioning railway stations in the future, spoiler alert for the other stations along the route, actually building out, a second kind of hub heart of those towns gives opportunities, let's put it that way.
So before we talk about Pocklington, there's a few really good questions. So I want to go big face to pick up some of those questions. Hello, everyone. So a few things that have been picked up. Raphael is saying, I'm using TFE branding, but wouldn't it be York Hull Connect? Wouldn't the York Hull connection be a local thing? Yeah, it could be done by the reform-managed combined authority that in theory has the East Riding and Hull. But I'm putting it as Transport for England for now, probably just because it's nice to put Transport for England there. A couple of other questions coming through. People going network of fans 50 say problem, neither of those routes go through the centre. We can't go through the centre of Stamford Bridge. Not possible. That's done. It's not possible. It's going to be an emerging theme. There is no way of getting into the centre of many of these towns. It's just not viable without catastrophic levels of property damage and, crucially, making everyone oppose it, and so it won't happen. That's and so that's kind of the situation. Mike C saying the route's starting to look quite indirect and windy, a bit like East West Rail. You start understanding why the new railway like this looks like this, is because it actually does become a challenge. Jamie is saying, seems like a big dog leg to serve Stamford Bridge, would not be better served by a different line. It's a fair point, but there's never going to be another railway line in that area. You're only going to ever get one bite of the apple. And I think it makes sense to include Stamford Bridge on this route, because you're essentially connecting it without too much of a hit to additional kilometrage. You're providing a connection to that commuter corridor that isn't much of a difference on journey times, given that our alignment is pretty much 100 mile an hour. Actually, a lot of it's 125 mile an hour cable, but it's a 100 mile an hour route almost in its entirety. We'll talk a little bit about that alignment, the hot and cold elements of the alignment for anyone who's watching this, seeing the different colours and what it means. We'll maybe talk about that next. Putting it on a branch line rather than dogleg, again, not happening. We're not building a branch. Again, it's not a 5,000 settlement, so it doesn't. It's luck alone that it's getting a railway connection at all, and I think it gets it by the fact that you're putting a railway in this corridor. But a branch line, no, not happening. A separate railway, no, not happening. Those things are not happening. Either it's on this railway or it continues to be served by bus. So, let's talk about Pocklington, because Pocklington is one of our 5,000 plus settlements. So we're going to look at how we serve Pocklington momentarily. Let's see what I have to say about Pocklington.
Pocklington is even worse than Stamford Bridge in that you have absolutely no way of accessing the railway station from either side, whereas at least in Stamford Bridge you've got the bridge and the access from one end of the former railway station. It's a real shame, because actually the station, as you see here, is the former railway station, looking pretty glorious, is right next to a bus depot. It's right next to the kind of the East Yorkshire, one of the major East Yorkshire bus depots. In fact, you can see one of the X46s there behind me doing a sterling job in attempting to replace the railway. What a fantastic transport hub it would be if the railway station ran through here, but it is simply impossible to get that to happen. It's frustrating, but I just don't think there's a world in which you can bulldoze your way in and out of a town that has had 50 plus years of development since the railway was torn up. It's a real shame. You've got your old engine shed, sort of railway building here as well. Loads going on. It would be fantastic if the railway could come through here. It's not going to happen.
So, Stamford Bridge. Let's have a look at what we're doing through Stamford Bridge, shall we? So, as our railway weaves in, you can see all of our weavy alignments sort of converge on the approaches to Stamford Bridge. I'm saying Stamford Bridge, Pocklington. They converge on the approach to Pocklington. The former Leeds and Yorkshire transport drivers gliding club, that's now the Wolds Gliding Club, we leave you one airfield, runway, but it's impossible to get anywhere near Pocklington without without an enormous diversion that then sends you into bumpy terrain and sort of sensitive areas. That airfield is not as important as getting a long-term transport connection in. So part of it is getting eaten, I'm sorry. For the people who are curious how you do get into Pocklington, though, you demolish... you have to buy an entire private school, for better or worse, bulldoze that. That's the only viable way you can do it without smashing residences. You come in and then all of a sudden you're in the centre of a town with all the roads and car parks that you have to navigate. How on earth do you manage all the road connections? Just have a look at the Borders Railway when it kind of had to try and do this. The railway goes single track and it's hopeless. And then you have to bulldoze part of a ceremonial park to avoid residences. It's not happening. What you're doing is putting a railway station, a couple of different options for locations, but you're putting the railway station by one of the main roads, close to the access, I'd say probably this is the better location here, actually. So you're getting the connections on the main the kind of the upgraded road to the industrial estate. You can connect up, and then you maximise the ability for people to walk into the city centre. Nice marked routes, nice widen those pavements, calm the road, and then it's starting to weave again as we come out of Pocklington. On our way, and then converges again, on our way over to our next destination. So what are we going to be, what's our next destination? What are we doing over there? Let's have a look, shall we? Of course, it's Market Wheaton. Let's see what I have to say about Market Wheaton.
Market Wheaton has similar issues to Pocklington in that the station is basically inaccessible without, I would argue politically and frankly sort of socially unacceptable levels of demolition. One advantage Market Wheaton has, though, is it has this ruddy bypass. The 1079 loops around in a fairly substantial single carriageway bypass, which offers the opportunity to pair infrastructure, to actually minimise the impact, the footprint. Of course, road curvature and rail curvature are not perfectly aligned, but if you then plan to place the station, it's not ideal to have a station not right in the heart of the urban core, but that's planning bad, mistakes that were made in the past. We can ameliorate that to some extent by, I think the station should be here at the roundabout with the vets, there's the vets, and with the road to home upon Spalding Moor, and the kind of one of the main ways up into Market Wheaton that way. What you do here, as well as building a better roundabout for humans to get across, is actually build a greenway up to the centre of Market Wheaton so that there is a very nice, and also a shuttle bus, because what you do is put the railway station over here. By putting the railway station over here, probably by buying some property actually, but by doing this, you'd be crossing the road over here, enough distance that you put the railway over the top, I dare say. It's very busy. All this is very busy. I wonder, it's kind of making the point of the video, really, isn't it? That this is hugely congested with a lot of goods vehicles around as well. In any case, railway station here, crossing the road here and following as close as possible that route of the Market Wheaton bypass.
So, what are we actually doing then? Let's have a little look at what that looks like, shall we? So, I did try a route over the top, and if anyone's curious as to how you get in, because again, you can't get there's whole residences, you can't get into Market Wheaton where the railway station is. You've got residential property demolitions, which is always bad, particularly when there's a few of them, particularly when it's like a residential street, because it's like you end up impacting quite a lot. It's not ideal, so it's very difficult to get in that side. I think you go around the bottom, and the advantage of going around the bottom and being connected to the 1079 is that you're bringing in people from the wider hinterland as well. Not to mention the fact that you're potentially getting, other connections are possible. So I think if the people who own this house are watching this, sorry, I think probably you just go, rather than destroying the allotments, not least because you in destroying the allotments you also have to destroy 2 residential houses anyway. You take what's the market? You go to this person, you take a blank check, you say, what's the market value of your house? We will buy it for double, maybe triple, and that'll be worth it for the fact that you then get a stakeholder's like, oh, cool, yeah, okay, maybe I'm actually at peace with that. That is the fact that you're demolishing my personal family home that I love and care about. Do that, and then you put the station there, and it's all good. Someone was asked, James asked about tunnels. Can you tunnel in? Again, no, tunneling only justifies itself really for the kind of those major fast mainline or mixed traffic mainline or high speed lines. Urban tunneling that's extremely complex, risky, and challenging and expensive is not something you can justify for a line like this. You can go around the outside, and these curves are 80 miles an hour. I was going to talk about these, weren't you? So the cooler the color, the lower the speed. So I don't think I've got much that's slower than 70 miles an hour through these. Here you can see there's different curvatures, different options that do different things. But yeah, so there's Market Wheaton. The challenge then is how to deal with the topography as you come out of Market Wheaton. Is that the topography is substantial, and coming around the side, the trouble with that is that you're up on the hill, and you've got to then work out how to manage that, and that is going to involve some heavy civil engineering and, Jamie, potentially a tunnel to actually get back close to the former route of the railway here. Actually, because again, in this situation with the hills, you do end up getting close to where the old railway was to deal with that topography and managing that. But we don't have to follow the contour lines quite as closely for a modern railway, with particularly when it's electrified. But there you go. That's the route, and then you kind of trace along a little bit of divergence as we get into Beverley. So Beverley is our next stop. So what do I have to say about Beverley? Let's see.
This is the Hull to Scarborough line, and we're in Beverley, and over there, down there, would be the junction where any connection, well, the former connection with the York direction line was. But there's a problem, because if we were to reinstate the former track bed from as it approaches through into Beverley, well, there's a couple of issues. There's the bypass and how you navigate your way around the bypass Beverley. The other is that, as you see here, this is the former railway alignment. The other issue is that this is a well-used connection through the large kind of residential hinterland of Beverley, and getting over it to put a railway on top, whilst from an engineering perspective is, there are good and bad reasons for doing it, you lose what really is an absolutely fantastic asset. And that's not good enough. We can do better.
Yeah, I think we can. So let's to my face again in the bottom corner. What are we doing when we come in? So rather than following the former route, coming in and bulldozing all this lot, not to mention the mess over at the... By the way, for the scrolling in and out, sorry, slow the video down if you're struggling with it, but those watching live generally used to my ADHD chaos. I don't think it's too flashy. Dealing with the bypass, a problem. The right thing to do is actually to phone the MOD, say, can we buy some of your driver training centre, please, and put a railway through it. And maybe you can integrate, you could just put a green tunnel over the top and keep doing your testing your half tracks, whatever it is you get up to there, you shooty people. And you come in from the north. You come in and bring the alignment in and onto the nice straight. You'd also probably remodel this so the mainline route is actually going off towards York, and then the secondary route is up towards Scarborough, because that's the line up to Scarborough. And then you come into Beverley, and after that, you're on the existing railway, and things are nominally more straightforward, or that's the theory anyway. Let's see, shall we? So, Hull. What do we do in Hull? Well, to be honest, the main thing I'd say that you need to do in Hull is worry about all the level crossings. There's a lot of level crossings that need to be dealt with. They're just not acceptable. The station layout is not great. But okay, so Hull is its own separate episode, so I'm not going to dwell on it. But yeah, there are definitely things you need to do in Hull. So we've talked about the local story, we've talked about the regional story, I think, but what about the national story? What about the big picture? We've also not really talked about services, and we've not talked about cost. Those are all things we're going to do in just a second. Of course, tonight's bonus will be coming up at 21:30. We're going to be talking about rapid city fixes using some Centre for Cities work, kind of centre-left think tank. Some Centre for Cities work that I think is kind of interesting, and it's kind of worth a little look. We'll also be answering a question from the audience that I think is quite fun and bringing up more maps to do so. Of course, we cannot give a plug without saying that episode 5 of Transatlantic will be landing tomorrow. Look forward to that. I am. And episode 6 will be the week after. I'm a little bit behind on the upload schedule, but there isn't really an upload schedule. There's 2 a month. I didn't promise necessarily when they'd land, but we're going to try and stabilize that a bit better. But yeah, episode 5 coming imminently. Do not worry. Some news. And it's worth, obviously, spending a minute just to talk about Lewis and Wickford, the 2 crashes here. In this case, an Electrostar falling over and seriously injuring 2 people and injuries to 18 others who've thankfully been discharged. We wish a speedy recovery to those 2 passengers who have been thinking about that. The day after, we saw a substantially less severe but a still significant derailment of another passenger train at Wickford. And well, there are a few things to spot. I mean, what you can see here is, ignore the kink halfway up. You can see a kink here I'd say ignore that because it's probably track damage. It's hard to tell exactly how long the train was dragging, but there's potentially 1.5 miles of track damage here. The thing that I'm noticing along here, not so much in the cess that the train is dragged along in, because that's all going to have been sent everywhere, but on the other side is, where are the ballast shoulders here? There are no ballast shoulders. Ballast shoulders are one of the key defences for a railway, an older railway like this that hasn't got undersleeper pads under the sleepers, against buckles, increasing its resistance to buckling in high temperatures. Yes, the hottest day of the year so far was when the Lewis derailment happened. The Whitford derailment was the day after. These are connected by the heat. I have almost no doubt that the RIB will conclude that. In fact, the RIB have already given us an interim bulletin, not a huge amount of detail, but they have put this picture, this CCTV screen capture from GTR here. This is actually from the back of the cab going the same direction the derailed train was. So this is a train 2 hours before that. I think 2 more trains passed between this and the derailment train. You can see the kink here horizontally. So if I trace the alignment, you can see the kink horizontally here. So this kink here and here. There also looks to potentially be a vertical component to this as well. So that there's these ballast bags here. There's work going on. There's the bridge here, which is, bridges are a risk factor for buckles. So this is, they've called this what do they call this? A track geometry irregularity. I've been saying it's a kink. This is a kink in the alignment that potentially under the 3 trains later snapped into a full buckle, over which the train derailed coming in this direction and then dragged and then went off the side of the embankment and rolled over and caused all that chaos, psychological chaos and physical chaos to the passengers. Now, it's not just the tracks feeling the heat, because there's a reasonably straight line from this 2015 report penned by the then chair of Network Rail. I don't know who he was. Now he's the rail minister. Which basically said, look, politicians, I'm great. I can stop you from being embarrassed by cancelling a load of enhancement projects that have overrun in budget, and you're not willing to increase the ceiling to just deliver those and do the other stuff because that's a good thing. I'm not going to fight for the railway. What I'm going to do is say I can do this on the cheap. I can take money from renewals and put it into the enhancements pot, so that the enhancements, major projects, things opening, electrification stuff, you don't have any embarrassment of those not being delivered, politicians. No one cares about renewals. Big deal. Fine. And it's not like we can't catch up in later control periods anyway. Insert sad horn here. Roll on over a decade and maybe we're starting to see the effects of losing. The main thing that this report did was kill off the National High Output Renewals team, losing that team and losing the volume of renewals that the high output trains could achieve. Well, let's just say we're not on top of renewals, and we should see more and more questions being asked of government of what are you going to do to get Network Rail back on top of its track renewals volumes, because that's the main way we can tackle heat-related problems from climate change. Talking of heat-related problems from climate change, urban and wildfires, it's not just the tracks feeling the heat, because this is people on a train going with the tracks. This video's looping. Tom Roots on the Twitters. This is a fire on the tracks, passenger train driving past. This is frightening. Not good. This is also houses burning down in the West Midlands as a result of wildfires. Britain is on, last week Britain was on fire. So amidst all of this, industry staff, railway industry staff, frontline, back of house, industry staff are bearing the brunt of it. And I'm thinking of you, and all of us watching should be thinking about railway staff who are dealing with, record low morale in the industry that's being kicked around, a government that doesn't seem to care and seems to be preoccupied with, filling up the box, keeping good PR and not really, telling a nice story, lying about who's bought trains in tweets, saying not your girl and then making a hash of what railway operations are like, generally being an absolute embarrassment to make good stories, rather than stories are important, but they also have to be true, which the DFT comms at the moment seems to not be. DFT comms, stop tweeting about trains, give it to the DFTO, create a GBR Twitter account and just stop. But it's evidence of what's important to the government right now, and what's important to the government right now, DFT, certainly the leadership of the DFT, the ministerial leadership of the DFT, is telling a good story or what they think is a good story, not actually heeding the staff who are trying to run a railway and keep the country moving. So what about our big picture? It's time to talk about the big picture, in particular how our new railway would be useful for the national railway network and how this might influence our design choices. This one's going to run a little long, by the way. It's going to be a slightly longer episode than normal to make up for the really short one I gave you kind of recently. So let's get my little face up. So what about the national network? Let's flick over to see what I'm choosing as my kind of preferred option. Don't let this swing what you think. Put in the comments, tell me which of the varying kind of options through the different towns you think is best. But if we have this connection from Hull that trains then follow up through Market Wheaton, through a station at Market Wheaton, then through a station at Pocklington, then a station at Stamford Bridge, a station kind of an east of York station at Dunnington, then down through the York Hospital station down here, and then come up through into York. Well, where can they go? Where can they end up? Well, the sky's the limit, essentially. So what I kind of want to point out is what could those services look like? And of course, freight is a key part of that story as well. So, well, what do you think, I suppose, about what that big picture is and how that works? Well, I want to talk about local, regional, and national services. So from a northern perspective, you have the potential to run services through directly to York, so you can kind of provide additional. It relieves a bit of capacity on the fairly congested route into Hull. So you can you might say, well, that kills some of the local services along that route. Well, ideally not. We need to be creating a few more platform station loops on some of those stations to get more intercity services into a regional service, at least into Hull. Hull doesn't classify as an intercity destination according to our classification system, but more on that next week. So connection direct, you create some more options about routes in that sense. Hull direct to York, but regionally you can actually start running Transpennine services. I suppose they're not really Transpennine if they're going direct from Hull up to York, and then run those north up to Scotland and actually get Hull a direct link northwards, because that is something it currently does not have. Of course, if we go back to the let's go back to here and think about freight. We're going to talk more about freight next episode, but freight is seriously important. There are a huge number of ports, particularly if we put our tunnel down here, for which having this connection, bypassing a load of very congested parts of the East Coast Main Line and getting up into York, would be very valuable. Not the end of the story from a freight perspective, but certainly something that would be a very useful asset from a freight resilience perspective. The next question we have to ask is, what about cost? What are we thinking on cost? How much is this railway going to cost? We talked about the big picture. Now we have to talk about costs. And the costs are sizable. Not much change left from £3 billion to deliver this railway is my estimation. 20 million per single track kilometre. Some people might say it's 20 million per two-track mile, but no, I've refined this down to 20 million per single track kilometre now, given inflation and such. 1.5 million per single track kilometre of electrification, which is a must for this railway. You don't build a new railway and not electrify it. It's not finished until you've electrified it. So you've got about 1.1 billion there in... actually, that number is definitely not right. That should be like 2 point something or other. Me not... Do your adding of it's fine. It's this, but I'll tell you what. Let's get the numbers up, shall we? Look, you can all wait just 1 second while I very quickly bring up the data for that one. Let's actually look at the number, and then I'll update the number, and then you can see the correct number in front of you, and everyone will be much happier, including me specifically. Let's go with, let's see, that number should be 2515. Yeah, okay, fine, good. So there we go. Let's see. Let's go with 25. What did I say? 2515 there. Fine, good. I'm happier knowing that that's been updated. Let us return to here, and also to you lot. Where have you lot gone? You lovely lot. Where are you? This is the live rail natters that you've come to love. So 2515. That's less than a year of HS2 spend, so I wouldn't get too worried about that scale. We're going to bring up some questions, so line up your questions, chuck them over quick. Less than a year of HS2 spend, well worth it. So here we go. So we've got our first kind of corridor connection here that we've put in. We're linking York and Hull, providing a strategic connection, one that benefits the region, and of course has lots of local benefits. For example, the ability to move York Hospital is probably one of the major local benefits that this railway would provide. But what are your thoughts? Let's see some of your questions. So Mike is saying that seems like quite a curvy alignment. I fear that it may actually be longer than the existing route via Selby. Is it competitive on journey times for a non-stop train? Two things on that. Firstly, the Selby route is competing on the East Coast Main Line, so you get a lot of extra capacity from this new route, not just the journey time improvements. But secondly, the route is still more direct, and you're still, because of the speeds of the route and the fact that you'd be running new electric rolling stock, hopefully to 100 miles an hour, certainly to 90, you'd get benefits in terms of journey time. I will be looking at journey times in a future. We're going to possibly look at journey times on this one in a future episode. We might do this for a few of our proposals when I chuck a few pennies to Ed Jeffries and get him to actually do the analysis on this to see what it looks like. Network of fan. You're not going to build this as 4 tracks. You don't need a 4-track railway here. 2 tracks is fine. It's plenty. Build a 4-track railway. That's doolally. Remember the seventh rule of the list. B Crossing saying how to cross the East Coast Mainline fast line south of York. Again, you don't need to. If you're flighting off onto the route, the speeds coming through there on the East Coast Mainline. You could manage. There are different ways you could do that. You could potentially build a single bidirectional connecting line that then only connects in as you reach the station, and speeds are slower because yes, trains are still going pretty fast on the East Coast Main Line at that point. South of York, you're going pretty fast as you go past the Park and Ride and the Tesco's. So yeah, you could. There is space for a bidirectional line that gets further into York. There are different things you can do along there. The station, the further you round the station comes away from the East Coast Main Line, the faster trains can be doing by the time they reach the East Coast Main Line and join. I would say that a double junction there would be better for getting things on and off rather than a classic single lead. There are things you can do to improve that, but it is absolutely a capacity challenge for sure. But I think there are lots of reasons why having a southern York Park and Ride and then the Dunnington east of York station would be very, very valuable to York. Did the cost include any potential work needed at York Hull stations, new platforms? No, it didn't include that. I think basically you can get away with the existing infrastructure as it is on that front. But yeah, there'd be benefits to improving that for sure. Yeah, so what service pattern would I have? I'd be looking at half-hourly all stations. Yeah, you don't want any. Potentially some faster trains in amongst the thick of it. You've got a high-capacity 2-track railway that would be ETCS ready, so you'd be running in that sense. You could run quite a complex timetable on what is a 2-track and fairly empty railway. It's not a single line. You can do quite a lot on that from a capacity perspective if you think about what you can squeeze out of the East Coast Main Line. But what are we doing next? What's next on our odyssey of Yorkshire bits of railway? Well, we're looking at the Yorkshire Coast Corridor and what we can do there. I'm excited to go into it. And, the key thing that I want to say is on this front is, what do you think? Tell me everything about what you think. What are the things that are missing? What do you think about the route? What would you straighten out? The reason that line is pretty curvy is because it's dodging a lot of stuff, because there is a lot of stuff. I'll probably have a bash at looking at what a nominal journey time could look like. There's one for maybe a bonus episode. So yeah, definitely one to have a look at. I think it'd be quite interesting to have a look at that and maybe have a more detailed view of what the speed curves might look like on that one. Definitely want to have a think. Yeah, direct Darlow to Scarborough service. Yeah, this is it. Scarborough to Darlow. That could be an interesting one. Well, the thing is, I'm not building a triangle, so you'd still have to change at Beverley to head northwards. So I'm not sure there'd be a direct Darlow Scarborough service. It'd be nice if there was, though. How fast will line speeds be? The route would manage you'd be looking at getting can manage 100. There's a lot of 125 mile an hour capable geometry that I've put in there, but you'd probably run it as 100 miles an hour route. Cycling paths for commuters, yeah, absolutely need to think. You can't just build that station on the outskirts of Pocklington, Market Wheaton and not think about, and Stamford Bridge and think about, and Dunnington for that matter, and not think, it also needs a complete place strategy to look at building a greenway, picking a route and building a very low traffic greenway connecting the station. It's just something that nice avenue you can walk down. Think about planning there and think about putting in some mixed use. So you put some not just residences, so you actually get some businesses to actually create a kind of a sort of, if you like, that corridor becomes a thriving part of the town. somewhere that people are happy to walk along and indeed, do a bit of work, pick up some coffee, whatever it is along that corridor. But certainly quiet greenway that prioritizes walking, cycling, wheeling over just traffic, but also plenty of space for buses too. Along the Yorkshire coast, Jamie. Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, no, the Darlow to Scarborough direct is definitely a good idea on that front. Yeah, for sure. So, video on my favorite train games. There's so many out there. Yeah, no, it's true. That's definitely. When I have more time, I need to get back into doing that. Not least Transport Fever. Watch this space, by the way. Now that I'm starting to do live episodes again, I might well have more time to be having a midday return to Amphitrust. So watch this space. Anyway, without further ado, we've ran a little long, but not too painfully long, I think. Pop your thoughts in the comments. I'm excited to see what you think about this one. Without further ado, everyone, take very good care of yourselves. Cheerio, cheerio. See you later for Class 317. Cheerio. Of course, we have to talk about the Class 317. It was the first of the all-steel Mark III electric multiple units. It was the first of the family that gave us the 318, 319, the 320, the 321, 322, 325, the post-train, the 455 and the 456. And also sort of the 442. I mean, yes, it is absolutely the 442 is a Mark III derivative. It's kind of like its own thing, right? And also, it gave us the 210 and the 150, the diesel trains. The 210, rather unillustrious career. And of course, the 150, in turn, gave us all the sprinters that we know and love. I'll see you all later on.